Hello, everyone. Today is Thursday, November 7th, 2024. This is Wes Fryer coming to you from Charlotte, North Carolina, where I'm excited to bring you a AI-powered conversation back in the summer of 2023, specifically in June of 2023. I had an opportunity to travel to Seattle, Washington, to the Center for an Informed Public at the University of Washington, and participate in a workshop called Teaching for Resilience, Finnish Ed Workshop. And my participation and leadership on the teacher board, advisory board of TIP Teachers, which is the Teachers for an Informed Public, all led to this. And so I'll include a link in the video description of this, and also I think I'll put this on my blog so you can find it there, to a post that I wrote called Media Literacy Lessons from Finland. And that was a post I shared right after the workshop on June 20th, 2023. But what I'm going to do, or what I have done, is I have put a 70-page PDF document called Digital Information Literacy Guide, a digital information literacy guide for citizens in the digital age. And this is a publication of faktabari.edu, and this is a media literacy organization that we learned about and had a wonderful opportunity to hear a lot about from Dr. Mikko Salo. And he was one of the leaders of our workshop. He was the co-founder of this Finnish media literacy organization. It's called if you translate it to English, it's FactBar. Faktabari is the Finnish name. And this is a primary resource that we emerge from. And so I am currently a middle school classroom teacher here in Charlotte, North Carolina. I teach a number of courses, including web design and computer programming, but the course I am teaching two sections of this semester is my media literacy course, also called Computer Applications. And so I'm excited to, for myself, process, hopefully in greater depth, the ideas contained in this 70-page PDF. I definitely believe we have so many important lessons to learn from Finnish educators, and I'm excited to see the ways that Notebook LM, which is an experimental project that Google has been developing for a number of years with one of my favorite authors, Stephen Johnson, can, create a conversational podcast talking about these topics. So you can find ways to connect with me by going to wesfryer.com, specifically wesfryer.com/after, includes links to my social media accounts. My media literacy lessons are primarily shared on my website, lessons.wesfryer.com. And I'll also include a link in the show notes to this podcast to a conversation the first Monday of October that we had with the Media Education Lab, because I'm now facilitating monthly webinars, first Monday of each month at noon Eastern Time, about different topics, and we talked about Notebook LM. And so here we go with a Notebook LM powered conversation. And the difference between what I've done before and this Notebook LM conversation is that I was able to customize the audio interview and direct the focus of the AI hosts. And so I actually had to shorten this, and I used ChatGPT to make it less than 500 characters. But this was the focus prompt that I put in to Notebook LM. I said, focus on the Finnish approach to media literacy as a model for U.S. educators, particularly those involved in civics education and inspired by Renee DiResta's New Civics. Emphasize the need for robust media literacy skills to help citizens avoid manipulation and recognize how media, including propaganda, shapes public opinion and influences behavior. This approach equips educators and policymakers to foster critical thinking and media analysis skills essential for today's informed citizenry. So, without further ado, here is the Notebook LM podcast.
Welcome to our deep dive. We're going to be looking at something super interesting today. How Finland is teaching media literacy.
Yeah.
And what we in the U.S., especially those working on civics education, can learn from them. You've probably heard of Renee DiResta's idea of New Civics, right? It's about how to give people the tools that they need to navigate all this crazy information that's online these days, and just make good choices. Well, Finland has been way ahead of the curve on this for years, and today we're going to find out what they're doing and see how it can help us prepare students Prepare them for the challenges of being a digital citizen.
What's so interesting about this is the Finnish approach. They really see digital information literacy as totally essential for a healthy democracy.
I mean, that makes total sense.
Yeah.
Like, it's not enough to just teach kids how to use the internet. You got to know how to evaluate information, identify bias, avoid being manipulated.
Right.
Like, it's a whole other level of skill.
You're absolutely right. We're sort of all swimming in this ocean of information, and we really need to be able to equip our students with the skills to be able to navigate those waters safely.
So how do they actually do this? Where do they begin?
Well, they start early, and they integrate media literacy into their curriculum from early childhood.
Wow.
And it's not just a separate subject.
Right.
It's actually woven into all aspects of education.
That's really impressive. So they're saying, like, this is just as important as reading, writing, and arithmetic.
Absolutely. They recognize that even though young people are comfortable with technology, they still need guidance when it comes to evaluating information. One educator that we read said, our students may be digital natives, but in some ways they are surprisingly inexperienced at evaluating sources online.
It's a wake-up call.
It is.
We just assume that because kids are tech savvy, they're media literate.
Yeah.
But clearly that's not the case.
Right.
So what are some of the skills? What are the things they really focus on?
Well, one key area is helping students understand the difference between misinformation and disinformation.
Okay.
Misinformation is simply false information.
Okay.
Regardless of the intent. So it could be an honest mistake.
Right.
Or a rumor that spreads quickly. Disinformation, on the other hand, is deliberately misleading or biased information spread with the intention to deceive.
Okay.
So that's the key difference there.
So that's a huge red flag, right? When you're trying to figure out, like, what's fake news and what's not.
Yeah.
Knowing the difference between those two things.
Absolutely.
Are there any other, like, frameworks or tools that they use to teach these skills?
Yes, there are. One of them is called DigComp 2.2.
Okay.
And this was developed by the European Union.
Okay.
Now, you might think, like, what does the EU have to do with us?
Yeah. Right.
But it actually has some very practical examples that can be directly applied to media literacy education in the U.S., especially when we're talking about new civics and preparing students for active citizenship.
Interesting. So this European framework can actually help American educators.
Yeah.
I'm curious, how does it work?
Well, one of the things that it emphasizes is the importance of analyzing search results and social media feeds. It encourages students to look for signs of bias.
Okay.
Also to separate fact from opinion.
Right.
And to consider the source of the information.
Yeah, like, where is this coming from?
Exactly.
It's almost like we're training these kids to be digital detectives, like always questioning and verifying what they see online.
Exactly. And it also delves into the tricky world of algorithms.
Okay.
It helps students understand how these behind-the-scenes codes can shape the information that they see. And this can create echo chambers that reinforce their existing beliefs, even if they aren't accurate.
Yeah. Algorithms.
It really are.
It's like they're creating these invisible filters that control what we see, what we don't see online. So Finland is teaching kids how these algorithms work.
They are. They're helping them become aware of how algorithms can influence their online experiences.
Right.
And potentially even manipulate their behavior, and encouraging them to be critical consumers of information, not just passive recipients.
Wow. I'm already starting to think I need to brush up on my own media literacy skills.
We all do.
But before we go any further, I'm curious, are Finns even big social media users? I mean, we always hear about Finnish silence.
It's a common misconception.
Really?
Data from sources like DNA and the Reuters Institute actually show that Finland has very high social media usage rates.
Wow.
They're just as connected as any other developed country.
I did not expect that.
Yeah. I guess you can't judge a nation's digital habits by its stereotype.
No, you can't, I guess. That's really interesting.
It is.
So it's not just teaching these skills in a vacuum.
Right.
It's about, like, preparing for real-world challenges that they'll actually face in their own social media lives.
Exactly.
What are the most popular platforms with Finns, especially young people?
Well, we're seeing a shift happening. While older generations are still using Facebook, younger Finns are gravitating towards platforms like TikTok and Snapchat.
Interesting. It seems like Facebook is losing its cool factor even in Finland.
It does seem that way. And this highlights a key takeaway for U.S. educators. The social media landscape is constantly evolving. What was relevant for teaching students about Facebook, say, 5 years ago, might not be as effective for TikTok or Snapchat today.
Yeah.
So we really need to be adaptable and stay ahead of the curve.
That's a great point. It's a reminder that media literacy is not a one-time lesson, an ongoing process.
Right.
Of learning and adapting to an ever-changing digital world.
Yeah.
But just knowing how to use these platforms is not enough.
You're absolutely right. Simply finding information online isn't enough, especially when you're dealing with these complex issues.
Right.
You really need to go deeper than that.
So what does that look like? How do you teach students to go beyond, just Googling something and taking the first result as, like, the gospel?
Well, researchers like Krita Keeley talk about the importance of critical online inquiry.
Okay.
And this is about approaching online research as an iterative process.
Okay.
So you're searching for information, you're evaluating its credibility, interpreting its meaning, and then you're synthesizing what you've learned.
Critical online inquiry.
Yeah.
That sounds like a valuable skill, but can you break it down a little bit further? Like, how would that actually play out in a real-world scenario?
Okay, so imagine a student is researching a current event for a school project.
Mm-hmm.
Instead of just reading the first article that pops up on Google, they would engage in this critical online inquiry by considering the source.
Yeah.
Is this a reputable news organization, a blog, a social media post, looking for signs of bias? Does the language or tone seem slanted in a particular direction? Cross-referencing information. Do other sources confirm or contradict what this article is saying? Evaluating the author's expertise. Is this person an expert on the topic they're writing about?
Like, what are their bona fides? What are their credentials?
Exactly.
Yeah.
So those are all things that a student would consider.
That's really interesting. So this critical online inquiry framework can really help students become more discerning information consumers.
Exactly.
They're not just accepting what they read. They're actively questioning it. Evaluating it.
And this is really essential for helping them to avoid manipulation and to recognize how media, including propaganda, can be used to shape public opinion and influence behavior.
Yeah. That's a crucial point. We're not just talking about these, like, abstract academic skills. This is real-world stuff. This is about giving students tools that they need to navigate a very complex and sometimes dangerous world.
Exactly.
Where information is often weaponized, to be honest.
Yeah.
So how do we teach these critical thinking skills? Are there any specific strategies or techniques that Finland uses that we could adapt?
There are. One strategy that they use is called pre-bunking.
Pre-bunking?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's interesting. Is that like debunking, but before the misinformation even spreads?
You got it.
Okay. Pre-bunking is about inoculating people against misinformation by explaining the tactics that are used to spread it in advance. So it's like giving their immune system a heads up before they encounter a virus.
That's a really good analogy. Yeah. So instead of just playing like whack-a-mole with misinformation after it's already out there, you're giving people tools to recognize it and resist it in the first place.
Exactly. And it ties in perfectly with the idea of new civics, equipping citizens with these skills that they need to be informed and engage participants in a democracy.
Yeah, I mean, this is all fascinating, but I feel like we're just scratching the surface. There's so much to this. But before we dive into the next layer of this deep dive, we're going to take a quick pause. Don't go anywhere. We'll be right back. And we're back, continuing our exploration of how Finland is basically turning media literacy into a superpower for their citizens.
I love that. A superpower. That's great.
It is, yeah. And before the break, we were talking about pre-bunking, this fascinating proactive approach to combating misinformation. But we also can't forget about debunking, too.
Because no matter how good you get at pre-bunking, some misinformation is still going to slip through the cracks.
Yeah.
So how do the Finns approach debunking, especially when it comes to helping students develop these, like, critical thinking skills?
Well, they emphasize that it's not enough to just say something is false.
Okay.
You need to provide an alternative explanation. Giving people that context and evidence they need to really understand why a particular claim is misleading or inaccurate.
Yeah. I mean, it's not enough to just, like, shut down misinformation. You have to replace it with accurate information. Otherwise, people are just going to cling to those existing beliefs, even if they're based on falsehoods.
Exactly. And it's not just about providing facts, it's about teaching people how to evaluate those facts, understand where they're coming from.
So it's about empowering people to become, like, their own fact checkers in a way.
Precisely. And speaking of fact-checking, Finnish fact-checkers actually play a key role in their media literacy ecosystem.
Okay.
They're seen as these trusted sources of information, and they work really hard to maintain impartiality and transparency.
I'm really curious to learn more about how they operate. What are some of the specific techniques that Finnish fact checkers use?
Well, they use a variety of tools and techniques, including things like reverse image search,
Okay.
metadata analysis, and even scrutinizing video editing to see if anything has been manipulated.
Yeah.
They're like digital detectives digging for the truth.
It sounds like they need a whole arsenal of skills to combat the increasingly, like, sophisticated ways that misinformation is being spread these days.
Absolutely. And it's not just about technical skills. It's about a commitment to these ethical principles. Finnish fact-checkers adhere to a strict code of conduct that emphasizes impartiality, transparency, and reliance on evidence.
That's good to hear. It's reassuring in this world where it feels like truth is constantly under attack to know that there are actually people out there dedicated to upholding those standards.
Right.
But it's not all on the professional fact checkers, right?
Yeah.
What can everyday citizens, especially students, do to be just more savvy information consumers?
Well, one technique that professional fact checkers use all the time is called lateral reading.
Okay.
And so instead of just reading one article really in depth, they open multiple tabs and compare information from different sources.
So it's like a multi-source verification process.
Exactly.
You're not taking one source at face value. You're looking for corroboration and context from other sources.
Exactly. And lateral reading ties into another important skill.
Oh, okay.
Strategic ignorance.
Strategic ignorance. That sounds kind of counterintuitive. Aren't we always supposed to encourage students to learn as much as possible?
Yes, but in the digital age, there's just too much information out there. We
Yeah.
need to be more selective about what we consume. So strategic ignorance is about learning to quickly identify and ignore unreliable sources, so you can focus your energy on the ones that are actually credible.
That makes sense because, we talk about mindfulness, being mindful of your attention. Don't waste your attention on these sources that are likely to mislead you.
Right.
But how do you teach students to, like, distinguish between the reliable sources and the unreliable ones? Are there any red flags they should look out for?
Yeah, there are definitely warning signs. So, for example, websites with poorly written content,
Okay.
grammatical errors, sensationalized headlines.
Right.
These are often less credible. So look for sources that cite their sources
Okay.
and have a clear editorial process.
Yeah, that makes sense. It's like you're giving them a checklist
Yeah.
to kind of evaluate that trustworthiness.
Exactly.
All this talk about evaluating sources and fact-checking is making me think about my own digital footprint.
Yeah,
What kind of trail am I leaving behind as I navigate the online world?
that's a great question. And it's one that Finnish educators are also addressing.
Okay.
They teach students about being mindful of their digital footprints and understanding the difference between active and passive digital footprints.
Active and passive, okay.
Okay.
What's the difference?
So active digital footprints are things we intentionally share online.
Right.
So things like social media posts, comments on articles, emails we send.
Right.
These are the traces that we're, consciously leaving behind.
Okay. So those are the things we're actively choosing to put out there.
Exactly.
What about passive?
So passive digital footprints are a bit more sneaky.
Okay.
It's data that's collected about us without our explicit knowledge.
Okay.
So think about things like cookies.
Right.
Those little files that websites store on our browsers to track our activity,
Mm-hmm.
or browser fingerprints.
Okay.
These are unique identifiers that are based on our browser configurations. They can be used to track us across different websites, even if we clear our cookies.
Wow, that is sneaky.
Yeah.
It feels like we're always being watched, even when we think we're browsing privately.
Yeah, it's definitely something to be mindful of. But, don't worry, there are ways to manage our digital footprints
Okay.
that protect our privacy. Finnish educators are teaching students about these strategies and encouraging them to be proactive.
Okay, I'm feeling empowered. It's good to know we have some control over our digital footprints. What are some specific tips that Finnish educators are giving their students?
Well, they're encouraged to be cautious about what they share online,
Okay.
especially personal information, their address or phone number.
Right.
They also recommend creating secondary email addresses for online registrations and being selective about granting location access to apps.
Yes.
Do you really need that weather app to know your exact coordinates all the time?
Probably not. I'm definitely guilty of clicking allow without even really thinking about it. It's like we're so used to giving away our data these days.
We are.
We don't even question it anymore.
That's why it's so important to be intentional.
Right.
About our online privacy. And it's not just about protecting ourselves from, marketers or advertisers.
Yeah.
It's really about protecting our freedom and autonomy in a world where data is increasingly being used to manipulate and control.
That's a really powerful point.
Yeah.
Data privacy is not just a personal issue, it's a societal issue.
It is.
It's about safeguarding our democracy.
Yeah.
And making sure we're not being manipulated by these forces that we don't even understand.
Right.
Speaking of forces that we don't always understand, let's talk about algorithms. They seem to be everywhere these days.
Yeah.
Shaping our online experience, in ways that we're not always aware of.
You're absolutely right. Algorithms are becoming more and more powerful. And it's so crucial that we understand how they work and how they can be used to influence our thoughts, our feelings, our behaviors. Finnish educators are really taking this challenge head on. They're teaching students about the inner workings of algorithms and encouraging them to think critically about how they're being used.
This is all so fascinating, but I have to admit, I'm starting to feel a little overwhelmed.
I get it.
We've talked about so many important concepts: critical online inquiry, fact-checking, digital footprints, algorithms. How can we possibly teach all of this?
Yeah.
Especially to younger generations. Like, where do we even begin?
That's where the magic of Finland's approach really comes in. They've been weaving media literacy into their education system for decades.
Wow.
Starting from early childhood.
Yeah.
They recognize that these skills are absolutely essential for navigating the complexities of the digital world.
Right.
And they are committed to equipping their students with the tools they need to really thrive. It's really inspiring to see how seriously they take it. Yeah. It's not just an afterthought. Like, it's really woven into the fabric of their education system. Right. They understand that these skills are just as important as, traditional literacy and numeracy in today's world.
Yeah, I love that they start so young.
Yeah.
It's like planting these seeds of critical thinking early on, giving kids the tools to navigate this digital world safely and responsibly as they grow up.
Exactly. And they're not just focusing on the technical aspects of media literacy.
Yeah.
They're also teaching students about the ethical implications
Okay.
of media and technology, helping them develop this sense of digital citizenship and responsibility.
So it's more than just, like, knowing how to use the internet. It's about understanding the power of these tools.
Right.
And using them in a way that benefits individuals and society as a whole.
Precisely. And it's also about empowering students to be active creators of media, not just passive consumers. So they're learning how to produce their own content, tell their own stories, and engage in critical dialogue with others.
I could see how this approach could be a real game changer for U.S. education. We often focus on teaching kids how to use the technology, but not necessarily how to think critically about it.
That's a really crucial distinction.
Yeah.
It's not enough to just be digitally fluent.
Right.
We need to be digitally literate.
Yes.
Able to really navigate the complexities of the online world with confidence and discernment.
Yes.
And that requires a real shift in mindset
Yeah.
for both educators and policymakers.
So what would that look like, practically speaking? Like, how can we take what Finland is doing and adapt it for the U.S. context?
Well, for starters, we really need to prioritize media literacy education across all grade levels.
Mm-hmm.
Not just as like a one-off lesson or a special unit. We need to integrate it into the curriculum.
Right, just like they've done.
Yeah, just like Finland has done. And we need to provide teachers with the training and resources they need so they feel confident teaching these skills.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah.
It's not enough to just talk about it. We have to give the educators the support they need to actually make it happen.
Right.
Are there other steps that we could take to create this culture of media literacy in the U.S.?
Absolutely. We can involve parents and families in the process.
Okay.
Provide them with resources and guidance on how to talk to their kids about online safety, media literacy, digital citizenship. And we can engage with tech companies, encourage them to design platforms and products that promote media literacy and critical thinking.
Those are all great ideas. So it's like this multi-pronged approach.
It is.
It involves educators, families, even the tech industry. It's like we all have to work together to build a society where these things are valued, where these skills are valued.
Exactly. And it's not just about protecting ourselves
Right.
from the negative impacts of media and technology. It's about really harnessing the power of these tools to create a more informed, engaged, and equitable society.
Yeah, that's such an important point. It's like moving beyond just this defensive posture.
Right.
And really embracing the potential of these things to empower individuals and communities. This deep dive has been so eye-opening. We've learned so much about Finland, about their innovative approach, and we've explored some really great strategies that we could adapt for the U.S. context.
Yeah, it's been a fascinating journey. And I hope it's inspired our listeners to think a little bit more critically about their own media consumption habits and to advocate for stronger media literacy education in their own communities.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
We all have a role to play in this, in shaping the future of media and technology.
Yeah.
By embracing media literacy, we can empower ourselves and future generations to really navigate this digital world safely, responsibly, and with a critical eye.
Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the world of Finnish media literacy.
Yes.
We hope you learned something new and that you'll continue to explore this important topic.
Absolutely. And remember, stay curious, stay critical, and stay informed.